Hello, welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 73. Our activities. We had our preview on Wednesday. Unfortunately, sadly, we were without Julie, but Julie is with us tonight.
Sad.
Yeah, it was sad. It was really sad. It was
At the
truly sad.
opera.
Exactly. You saw
I saw
Level M?
Lalo and
Classic.
Eugene Onegin is Monday.
Okay. All right.
I'm getting my
So-
tea.
The Realm of Ideas is free to all. I have a tea. Oh, do you have one? Okay, cool. Bring your remnants. Perfect. Okay, so thank you again to Tease Tea. We got this beautiful gift, and we're kind of sharing it with our friends. We've passed out some of our things to our kind of followers. It's really been greatly appreciated. What do you have?
Jasmine.
Oh, so I have Jasmine too.
Oh, did you
Mhm.
want to open up a different one?
It's Penguin.
Do you want to open up a different one?
Penguin loves Jasmine.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I have an open one.
Oh, I
It's
have
in
it.
my purse.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Anyway, so the Realm of
Alright.
Ideas is free to all. And episode 73 our activities. Now I had presented the idea
Having
on
allergies.
Wednesday. Sorry, P. Julie's been sneezing and she's been all congested.
Tree
everything.
pollen allergies.
Yes.
Oak
yes,
pollen.
Yes.
Uh,
Even Penguin was kind of stuffy.
stuffy and
Yeah,
sneezing.
stuffy and sneezy. So anyway,
Yeah.
our activities.
Yeah.
All right. So before we so basically what I was talking about is what are they, where do they come from, what are their importance, how do they indicate where we are in society, what period in the world, and things like that, the value of them and what they are and what they can tell us about things. So basically this derives from some of my previous ideas. We've talk about the idea of architecture as a verb, and styles and activities, different activity styles, utilities and activities, and the value or lack of value that architects have contributed to the conversation. I think one of the things that is somewhat troubling is the fact that one of the things Julie and I were talking about today is the fact that architects have a tendency to kind of reflect society rather than to try to predict and determine it. It's usually something that they're kind of like last to the party. Architects, however, I believe have the opportunity to generate architecturally provocative artifacts, which can provoke those things that kind of bring about a society. However, it has been rare for that to be the case. I'd say maybe in the Gothic period that was true to some extent, maybe in the Renaissance too, but that was kind of probably more in terms of I think the invention of perspective certainly had the potential to make those things more salient, but it kind of manifests itself probably more in painting than it did in architecture. Anyway, so that's something we're going to go into. But first, the most important thing is what's new in Julie?
Quite a bit.
Oh, good
I'll
for
get
you.
my drawing.
Yes,
Oops, I kind of forgot.
No,
Kinda out of
not
it.
to worry.
Right here. Right here.
Mhm.
I have to hold it up so I don't sneeze
Mhm.
all over it.
Mm.
So funny, I was so out of it. I photographed it and put it back.
I wonder if anyone's ever figured out I feel that the tea is a kind of mood enhancer. It kind of somewhat mellows and focuses you.
Yeah, it does.
Even though there's caffeine, it doesn't seem to kind of have that same. I can't drink coffee. I've tried to drink coffee; it almost killed me.
Well, because it is very harsh and tea is much more gentle on the system.
Mhm.
So this is my drawing. As you can see, it's almost complete. I have titled my drawing here Lignification of a Writing God. And what my science drawing is, all my drawings and paintings are science paintings and science drawings. What my drawing visualizes, if Bruce would be kind of to swoop in a little closer so you can see the details, we might have to angle it so it doesn't reflect so much. Yeah. Is it is an Edo period writing box, but the entire writing box is shaped like, styled, and decorated with bamboo motifs. as well as the Japanese musical instrument, the sho, SHO, which is bamboo tubes. There's some lacquer, there's some metal. It has a bowl shape and it's held very awkwardly in the hands, but it's primarily made of bamboo and or lacquered bamboo. I did some research on the aging process or the maturation process of the bamboo plant as it grows in the wild, and discovered some quite fascinating things. So, what lignification means, it's a hardening, a strengthening, and a fortifying. It can be applied to many different things, but in plant science, it's the hardening and strengthening of the plant fibers themselves, the stems and the stalks, in this case, the bamboo stalks. So when bamboo is young, or young shoots, that's what you would eat in a stir fry. You could not chew through old bamboo. I mean, it's used to make scaffolding. It's used to make carts and bicycles and buildings. I mean, it's incredibly strong. Uh, Here's why. When bamboo is young, the young tender shoots have 10 times the amount of sugar as older bamboo. So what it does is it sheds its carbohydrates or sugars, loses its sweetness and tenderness, and as it ages, it is far less sweet, not palatable, really not very pleasant to eat, hard and fibrous. But what is fascinating is scanning electron micrographs of the natural maturation and aging process of the bamboo plant shows that its structure changes dramatically. The phloem changes and the xylem changes and the pockets in the cells. And it has these pockets of cells that look exactly like cherry blossoms. And I've treated the cherry blossom, which is seen as a delicate and a tender thing, like a table saw blade cutting through the maki-e lacquer of the writing box. But then this cherry blossom pattern, as it occurs in these, this is how they actually look. As you get up here, it starts morphing into actual cherry blossoms that are drifting and swirling and dancing and contorting in the space around the writing box. So, yeah.
As these things get, now, two things. As these
Yeah.
things get more hardened and less sweet,
Yeah.
do they also repel men and start to collect kittens?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
Now, the second thing is talk about the distortions in the perspective, because one of the things that happened in your earlier piece when you were working on a similar theme was you started to very much see the distortion of the perspective. I mean, though I work more in a kind of Western idiom than you do, you work more in the kind of like here, you have employed perspective to show the distortions and the permutations. What was the reason behind that?
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. I use the distortion as a narrative tool. So, in terms of what's important, narratively speaking, I use the distortions to show the motion, to show the content, to illuminate certain parts of the structure, certain aspects of the research, and aspects of the science as it is being shown by the art. So, yeah.
Okay, good.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right. So, all right. So, what are our activities? Now, what I mean by that is there's an individual's activities, and then there's the activities that we hold that I would say represent those things that we have in society. Now, an activity is an action. It's something that we do. Like I said, architecture being a verb. is such that every individual persists to a degree that they decide to persist, and as a result, persist in a relationship in the natural world. So that persistence has a style. That style has a desire, and that basically takes on certain activities. Now, individuals within activities can be an individual thing, as well as the fact that it can exist as a kind of societal circumstance. Now, when I look back, I see the fact that there are times when these things have changed. If we look at the way people have lived, there have been mass changes as, again, as we go from kind of like our primate base to our kind of human base. We've seen certain things in terms of even our own physiology, but more subtle than the physiological, right, which does take place, are the adaptations we have in terms of the activities: sleeping, eating, sitting, laying,
And
running,
preparing
prepare.
food,
Right,
which is
right.
a
But I'm
huge,
saying, we look at those things and we kind of say to ourselves, okay, why was it? Or maybe we don't ask these questions. Maybe that's kind of part of the issue. We don't ask the questions like, why is it we do this as opposed to that? And why is it that at other times people did certain things? Now, there were times when society has always had a sense of adventure. Society has always had this sense of wanting to find what was over the horizon. We've talked about the difference between kind of, say, like kind of traditions and cultures, and the fact that at a certain point people decide there are certain things that are more important than the survival itself, and that there's certain things that they decide they would kind of rather kind of like die with, as opposed to like the fact that there is this impulse that we have to persist.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
we have those things that we do. We sit at conference tables, we kind of sit at dinner tables, we walk, we run, we swim, we entertain ourselves. We basically kind of like have what I would say is a certain repertoire
Sorry, I can't
of
really fit on
activities
this one.
in our kind of like
Yeah.
in our daily life.
Uh-huh.
Right now, we're sitting at a table talking on a screen to people who are basically kind of seeing us from the other side. So, what are they? What desires do they portray? What things do we looking for? Do we ask ourselves these questions? So one of the things that was interesting today was a really beautiful exhibit. Our friend Mr. Spock had kind of told us that he had seen this and about the Gothic period that had been kind of presented, that is up at the in the Metropolitan.
It just
And
opened.
it just
It
literally.
opened
And
yesterday.
it was an interesting show. And we actually saw some of our friends there. Yeah, last night they had seen it, so we talked about that.
Can
and
I
they
give
could-
the title so people can
Sure.
look it up? Gothic by Design,
Mhm,
which is a
mhm.
very,
Yeah,
very
and
apt
what
title.
it did was
Yeah.
it wanted to look at something we've talked about,
Uh-huh.
which is the nature of drawing as a generator. And I feel
Uh-huh.
as if there was, in fact, an aspect where the speculative aspect was presented. When you look at it, there were certain desires, there were certain things.
Uh-huh.
The one thing that was interesting is there were a lot of beautiful drawings, but what's interesting was, for a lot of the case, these were kind of two-dimensional patterns. And this is anywhere from like some of them were the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century. And this was prior, the bulk of the work was prior to the invention of perspective. So one of the things that Julie and I were looking at was the fact that these were people who were trying to find a way to convey these desires with the tools that they use, which are actually, ironically, very similar to the tools that architects use probably up until, I don't know, the 1980s and 90s, until AutoCAD.
The tools
But I
didn't
mean, in
change
fact,
much.
these tools are still tools that I employ in my own drawing table when I'm kind of using it to kind of like make drawings or make models. And in fact, I could, the drawings that I saw on the wall that were made in the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century did not look all that different from
Sorry,
drawings that I
get
used to
another
make
tissue.
myself. Yeah, by all means. So I think that one of the things we'll be talking about soon, probably in summer, will be the fact that one of the things I noticed that kind of somewhat concerned about is the fact that the future which is something that we can kind of speculate as to what exactly that means, was something that for me, when I was a boy in 1969 at 10 years old, seemed to be within relative ease and grasp. We could see at the World's Fair in 1964, and we saw with NASA and the space program what the future looked like, what it was going to be, and it was right there. We almost could reach out. And literally at the World's Fair, you got a chance to kind of touch the prototypes. And what's interesting is now, 55 years later, it's not so clear, right? Then at that future, which still has not been eclipsed, it has still not been manifest, probably is further from our grasp now than it was then. I know that I mentioned the other day that that Artemis 2 had made a great leap,
They were
which
very
was
successful.
they were able to go further from the planet than any humans had ever traveled, and they had eclipsed the record that was set by Apollo 13, which was plagued with maladies, and we almost lost that crew.
Yeah.
But as a result, that was not that was an aberration that kind of forced this to take place, whereas this was actually one step past that in order to kind of be further. But at the same time, when we look at things like self-driving cars and some of the things that we're kind of dealing with technologically, the main shift is the fact that rather than being of national interest and being determined by governments, these are being determined by private individuals who would be able to take the mantle that has been kind of like has been dropped or squandered by nations. I mean, the United States, and I'll never forget when I first saw that speech by JFK at Rice University. You know, that was probably, remember when I think
It was a brilliant
it was an absolutely brilliant speech.
One of the best
Great,
speeches
one of the
ever.
greatest, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it basically kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, this is what we as a nation need to aspire to as a vision. Now, a lot of people have kind of looked upon things to say as distract. Now, you know, and I find that kind of like a little bit repulsive. But the point was, here was an individual who threw down the gauntlet and said, this is what America needs to do as a nation. We squandered it. You know, I mean, you know, we kind of like 12 men have, you know, kind of went to the moon. 4 of them are still alive. Hopefully by the time we get back to the moon, there will be new people. But the idea that we would never have hundreds, if not thousands of people who would be moon based from that day has been a major disappointment. Anyway. No, I talked for a while, so I just want to make sure I give you an opportunity to kind of say something. Thanks. Yeah, I know you're a little bit addled.
Yeah, a bit.
It's kind of like, look at this. You're like a normal person.
I know.
There's nothing extraordinary about you at the moment, is there? So sad. What's it feel like?
Bizarre.
It's, yeah.
Anyway.
How many fingers?
19.
Close, I had 37.
Yeah, great.
P. Oh, P. Oh.
Anyway, I was going to bring up a couple of things.
Were you able to use it with your little adult brain?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, I was going to bring up a wonderful and very, that feels good. I want a massage later.
Okay. How's that? A tap-on massage.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah. Anyway, I was going to bring up 2 really great films by Jacques Tati that speak perfectly to our topic, which is our architectural activities, or as I like to think of it, activities of architecture, which I think is a very apt title also. So if anyone has not seen these, I urge you to run out and buy them, not just rent them. Oh, that feels good. Or stream them. Look how fluffy my hair is now. It's great. Mon Oncle, written and directed and acted in by the phenomenal Jacques Tati, who, like the Marx brothers. There were no equals to the Marx Brothers. The closest were Monty Python, who we love also. But I would say my favorite three of all time: Marx Brothers, Jacques Tati, Monty Python. Anyway, Jacques Tati's films used architecture in every single frame as a foil for the failings or successes or absurd situations, the existential crises, the social malfunctions of humankind better than anybody, actually. And Mon Oncle is about the forced modernization of Paris, as is Playtime, one of the greatest films ever made. Where
the one with the house with the funny fountain?
Mon Oncle, yeah, that stars this incredibly hilarious house.
Yes, the house actually is a star in the film.
Yeah.
And what's the one with the corporate office building? Is that in the same film?
Playtime.
Yeah.
Which is a brilliant, and I just have to say, Jacques Tati went bankrupt and was ridiculed after Playtime came out, which is now hailed as one of the greatest films of all time. But he built what is called Tativille. He built those sets, meaning he designed those sets, meaning he was the architect of those sets. He did the drawings, he did the models, and they are incredibly dehumanizing and absurd, and the scenes are indelible. I don't want to spoil anything. Would you like to talk about them? Because they are incredible films and speak exactly to what our topic is.
Well, absolutely. And I love to spoil things.
Oh, please do.
No, okay. No, I mean, I think what's interesting is, I think we're talking about the 1920s.
Yeah.
I mean, from 1890 to 1920, I think there was the last time I actually saw any real change, or at least I can chart any real change as we moved kind of like from the industrial era into the modern era. But I think we saw an actual adjustment or a realignment with kind of architectural kind of like provocations. And, there was this idea of kind of going from the big blockish, kind of stoic rooms with separate realities to this more kind of free-flowing plan. We see that in Frank Lloyd Wright, we see it in Le Corbusier, we see it in Mies van der Rohe, we see it in the 20th century, where the plan became more free and more flowing and more open, and the walls became curtains, and they basically were glass. And
curtain
the model,
walls.
They were called curtain walls. But the thing is, what happened was the model in which the environment was to exist had a major transformation. And that was something that kind of existed, in fact, the model of the Katsura Villa and the Japanese kind of like, house was very much a kind of a model by which they kind of could see that as a kind of extension of the kind of more free-form house. I mean, I think now the possibility of the fact that mobility has become such that there's an opportunity again for architecture to transform. It's slowly moving in that direction, but I kind of think it really needs to kind of have something that also takes place in terms of the utility and the activity. I don't think it's doing so, but I think it certainly has that potential. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Say.
What I'd like to point out, what's key
when
about...
you will say, I always know it means you want to do speakies.
Oh, appreciate it. I don't want to interrupt you.
But you love to interrupt me, and you're good at it.
Oh, thanks. What I want to point out above all is that the architecture, especially in these two Jacques Tati films, and there are not a lot, but these two in particular, the architecture itself controls human activities, and that is the key. It controls how people make food. It controls how they walk. In fact, Mon Oncle is this absurd house with landscape architecture that is so controlling. It controls how guests must walk, There's a fountain that's absurd that is turned on only when guests are there for a show by the new petite bourgeoisie. And the kitchen is so forbidding and so terrifying that basically Jacques Tati cannot even figure out how to make a cup of coffee, which he made in the old-fashioned way every day, because the kitchen appliances literally attack him.
Mm-hmm. No, it's funny.
It's
I
just
remember
a
I read that
great
film, and I think what was interesting was it showed the French character and how the French character was adjusting to this new circumstance, and it showed the gracious, generous, patient French manner, and the way it would be accommodating and agreeable, but at the same time was completely perplexed as to what was going on.
Yeah,
it was hysterical. And I think it was one of those things that really gave you an overview of the way in which this circumstance was taking place. I also remember there was a funny Warner, I think it was the Frank Lloyd Wrong house. Yeah, in the Warner Brothers cartoon.
It was a classic Looney
Tune. And it was just kind of, it had robots, and Wright never did robots, but I mean, it was like one of these things where it showed all these modern conveniences and they'd all gone awry, and it basically became quite hysterical.
It's discovered by two stray dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great cartoon.
I remember this story. Someone told me that.
These are good.
Mm-hmm. During the end of the Art Nouveau period into the beginning of the 20th century, there was this maestro architect who basically was, going into every portion of the house.
Mm-hmm.
He designed a house, he designed the furniture, he designed the curtains, he designed the dress that people would wear. And this story where the great maestro comes over to see how his minions are doing with his masterpiece. And he comes in and he kind of knocks on the door, and he's got his cat and his cape and his coat. And gentleman comes to the door, he opens up the door, and the architect looks, shakes his head, and he's like, "Maestro, I mean, I'm wearing your outfit exactly as you designed it, and I'm wearing, the slippers, and it's like you designed it." And he goes like, "Those are for the parlor, not the hallway."
That's great.
And it was like, but that was the kind of reality, of the kind of like overbearing kind of maestro master architect. But anyway,
that one.
It's nice. So, but I think we now are moving into a situation where there's a great opportunity. The mobility by, you want this?
Yeah.
The mobility by which, is this one empty?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. The mobility by which we have freedom, much more freedom from a lot of the things we had. I mean, my telephone or my mobile phone allows me to have most of the things that I had in my hand. So my books now and my papers and my ability to draw and a lot of things that I had has made me question, what artifacts do I need? Now, I know people who basically have seen artifacts and things like that as completely unnecessary. So they believe that this idea of this nomadic lifestyle is much more possible, which I think is very exciting. So I think right now there's a tremendous opportunity, given the freedom of movement and the ability to kind of, possess information in a much smaller kind of realm than we used to do, has afforded us the opportunity to kind of look at some of these activities and utilities. We still will meet, we still will converse, we will still kind of break bread together. But again, it's not uncommon. In fact, it was very common during COVID for us to basically carry on our activities separately. And I mean, we all learned about, Teams and these
Didn't
other kind
serve
of things
anybody
that
well.
no, well, look, in a way, I found that social media allows us to connect
Yeah.
across the world. In fact, one of the reasons why we do our program
Mhm.
at 2 o'clock is the fact that, like, people, a lot of the people that listen to us, who listen to us live, listen to us from other parts of the world that
Yeah.
are still up. So my Asian friends are still up. My
Yeah.
European friends are now up.
Mhm.
And in fact, like I said jokingly, the only people who are sleeping are the people who live on the Atlantic Ocean, which is, I don't think, many of our viewers. Well, I mean, relatively speaking. But I mean, I find that people are likely to kind of turn up
Mhm.
it when they do, because they're actually in their part of the world. This is a reasonable time to talk. And in fact, considering the fact that we have, let's see, we have people right now that we're dealing with, people that we're doing projects with in Finland, in Turkey, in
Yeah.
China. So
Yeah.
it's like we have people currently all over the world, which we have to find ways to say, oh, let's see, what's the time difference? 14 hours, you're 14 hours
We
ahead
have
of me.
global partners.
Well, I mean, again, when you kind of live in a kind of rarefied world,
I'm out of tissue.
oh, sorry,
I'll be
Pam.
right back.
When you
These
live in
are
a
good.
rarefied world, there, a lot of times the people you speak to are kind of fairly widely distributed. But anyway, so back to this idea. We assert ourselves, we create this, and I talked about the idea of an architecturally provocative artifact. I believe that we are creating the possibility for paradigmatic structures that can basically perform the provocation of novel utility. And I think that we are moving in a position where maybe we become more detached, more isolated, more hermetic. But at the same time, the desire is, where will we go with those opportunities? For me, I always feel as if one of the things I've learned, one of the things I've seen, is the fact that as we've gone from the machine age to the process age, and I would call it the process age, because I believe that we will eventually kind of start to understand the fact that the things that we're learning about the natural world are actually having more an effect on society than we would like to admit. But I think I'm encouraged to believe that's even more so than we kind of admit. So I believe that the organic, maybe a kind of a natural kind of delineation rather than a machine delineation, is actually more of the model that I'd like to kind of hope would kind of take over as we move into the next period. Now, again, I think that there are certainly critiques of the end of kind of like a modern era or a postmodern era. But I believe a lot of these things generate themselves from, I'd say, a position more of envy, of understanding, and as a result are more assertive of reinforcing the ideas rather than overcoming them, or basically providing another model to take place. So again, one of the things that we've been speaking about is the fact that the potential exists, I believe, to take on the idea of the fact that the things that we do will be the process by which, or become part of the process by which we kind of like generate this new era. So, when I look back at previous times, and I was looking at this in terms of the exhibit today, is that it wasn't so much that drawing had not existed before the Gothic period. It was how the Gothic period manifested drawing. And how it did was that actually it was, in fact, generating, using certain tools, certain things that had not existed. And like I said, those tools existed up to and including and are still kind of used today. But let me just read this piece here.
I'll move my drawing out of the way. I
yeah.
don't want to get chocolate.
All right.
That chocolate's really good.
Mhm.
It's good with the tea. Actually.
It is, yeah.
I'm going to mention that combination.
Okay, so here's what I said.
Oh man, I got my tissue.
There are things that you bring with you and sometimes are always taken, such as drawings as a generator, as from it will come your opportunities, as the desires to express oneself in new forms emerges. The institutions and their patrons will no longer be able to make a compelling argument for their authority. And as a result, the authority will coalesce around that new compelling argument as it emerges. The rejection of the work was out of envy and reinforced rather than diminished the nature of the work. So, impotence and incompetence rather than innovation. So, those are two separate thoughts, but basically what they're doing is they're talking about the fact that there is the potential to kind of work from these things the same way that the Gothics worked from utilizing drawings, and then eventually it would basically become a different unbreakable bond when they merged their particular drawing techniques with perspective. So that kind of takes us up kind of to the present time, where now, as a result of AI, we can do kind of like iterations at a greater degree of frequency than we could previously, which allows us to kind of see a kind of more three-dimensional kind of aspect. However, the abstractions and models that we use, I still believe, should move more towards the organic and less from what I would say in the Gothic, which was a geometrical, to the machine, in which case it was an engineered model, to now an organic model. Anyway, you have something you want to share with us.
I have a fable. I'd like to talk about, I gave you the really interesting ones. I think these are great.
Really interesting one.
Thanks. And here's a good pairing. Dark chocolate covered Sicilian lemon peels with teas, tea, jasmine. Goes super well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to talk about human activities and mycological architecture. And I'd like to read you a fable of Michael. It's very short. So what happens when a human structure is built for the purpose of its symbiont? It's symbiont in production, and in this case, it's gastronomic symbiont. So in fact, we can talk about the architecture of leafcutter ants, because this is a human example of what leafcutter ants do. And this is just a beautiful tale. For those of you who don't know, leafcutter ants do not eat leaves. They farm leaves. They farm fungus using the leaves in a series of incredibly structured, intricate underground architectures that are meant specifically as farming and incubation and harvesting chambers. So the architecture of leafcutter ant hills is rather amazing, as are the tunnels. They're like nothing you have seen, except this is a beautiful human example. There is a place called the Roquefort Papillon Cellars. Papillon means butterfly in French. And in my research, I came across a really great description, which I'll briefly read, of what they actually do. What do the Roquefort cellars have to do with bakers? Well, sourdough rye bread plays this essential role in the cultivation, and I'm going to add my own, in the farming of Penicillium roqueforti, which, for those of you who are unaware, is the bacteria. It's the culture that makes Roquefort cheese Roquefort cheese. So according to a well-established tradition, every year at the beginning of autumn, and in accordance with the phases of the moon, which is not a crunchy thing, it actually has everything to do with how the cultivation of Penicillium roqueforti grows. So this is making human architecture to create the optimal farming conditions for a bacteria to actually make a product that is enjoyed and consumed by humans. But it's also the perpetuation of the species.
Hmm.
So, in fact, this architecture is furthering the development of the bacteria. Sorry, do you want me to
Interesting.
say? I don't
No.
know.
Actually, this is an interesting thing. I want to
Okay,
point out something I
sure.
think is very important.
Should I wait?
Yeah. Take
Okay,
1 second.
Sure, yeah.
As I see it, architecture is a kind of like I said, it's a thing that you do. It's the way in which you kind of manifest your life within, or a species manifests its life within the natural world. But there is a speculative aspect. We've talked about the fact that a lot of people say, what does an architect do? An architect builds buildings. And we know that's not correct. Architects don't build buildings. Contractors build buildings.
Yeah.
And then we've heard the fact that sometimes say, like, architects make models of buildings to kind of, but in fact, what architects do actually is speculate on the possibility of organizational structures that can provoke activity. Now, sometimes they can be only a drawing, only a sketch, never get built, never get used, but you can imagine yourself within them. So in this case, right, this is a speculation. So architects speculate about potential artifacts. That's what we do.
I think that's very
So
well
say.
said. Sure. Okay. So, in accordance with the phases of the moon, a baker prepares a few hundred loaves of bread in the oven of the specially designed Roquefort Papillon cellars. This is a rather special baking process, thank you, since these loaves, and I'm adding mine, are not meant to be eaten by humans. They actually are made with a burnt crust. So these bakers are baking homes for penicillium.
Nice.
They are baking dwellings.
Houses.
They are building houses, and they don't put it like this. I'm putting it like this. They are baking architectures, mini architectures, very, very small homes, and turning what would have been human food had it been baked
Actually,
or
they're
prepared.
Contractors. No, they're
Yeah,
contractors.
true,
The thing is, like, what happens is the model is generated, in this case, by nature. Nature is the architect. And what happens is they are the contractor.
Okay, so the contractors who would have been contracted.
The bakers are contracted to build the yes, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I don't have my usual stamina.
Well, you're not sneezing right now, which is good. And I think
I can't breathe.
Oh, sorry, P.
Anyway, what is fascinating?
My rubbies is helping.
It's helping a lot. My back hurts.
Sorry, P.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Spock wanted to see that. He thought this was a cool shirt.
Yes, it
is. This is from the Museum of Natural History from a long time ago.
Great. I'm going to continue now.
Yes, you will.
Because a tale is best told when you can hear it.
And it's still warm.
Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, P.
It's okay, Puddle. I don't have my usual stamina. So the contractors are not crafting this bread, which would normally be eaten and consumed by French humans. It is being made inedible to humans, which is fascinating. So what actually was a human source of food, and in fact a staple of human sustenance, is now turned into an architectural dwelling. In fact, a kind of a petri dish, but a home for the bacteria Penicillium roqueforti. Here is how. It's just great. So they bake these loaves, a little bit lower, to have a very burnt crust, and they bake them at the insanely high temperature, which is 1,472 degrees Fahrenheit. I kid you not. And for those of our friends in Europe, 800 degrees Celsius, incredibly hot. That's not how you would normally bake a bread. So it is inside these loaves or architectural dwellings that Penicillium roqueforti mold is grown. It is left to consume the bread. So what's beautiful about this wild fable is the mold consumes its own home, and the mold eats its house, and the mold changes and rapidly evolves as it consumes its own architecture. I just love this. Then it is collected by the contractors, by the humans who made these micro architectures and added to the cheese, because the cheese cannot be Roquefort cheese without the injection of copious amounts of the mold Penicillium roqueforti, which is what gives it the blue veins, until the whole process is repeated the following autumn, which is wild because it's annual. So this artisanal and empirical method harks back to the very old legend that it was a shepherd who originally discovered Roquefort cheese. It's said that after sheltering in a cave in a rainstorm, which I've heard, but they don't say here, this shepherd accidentally left a chunk of rye bread in a bowl of sheep milk cheese, which is highly likely because he would have been eating the bread and the cheese. That's what the shepherds ate in the cave. Now, the cave is the architecture, is the perfect dwelling for the cultivation of this mold. So the contractors baked architectures to mimic the conditions in the cave of the shepherd. And when the shepherd came back, he found the bread was totally moldy, but that his mold had filled the cheese with blue-green veins that we now know to be Roquefort. He obviously was very bold because he then ate it and found, wow, this is really great.
You might have, yeah.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Can you also grow this mold, like, say, under nerd girls, or like
nothing grows under the nerd?
No, it's probably, but it's dank and it's damp and it's like mushrooms would grow there too.
Maybe.
Probably, yeah. Yeah. So again, I think what we see here is that
very
I think what we see here is the fact that there are these processes that take place in ways that allow us to kind of understand that. Now, I think, let's see, given the time when I was, I'd say, with like living in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, I've seen different activities. Very rarely, I think that I would say that probably in the 70s and the 60s, there was more of a kind of like lounging contemplative environment where people kind of like, oh, that's beautiful. What is it?
It's a funicular floor from the exhibition.
It's from the Gothic?
Missed it. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Look, it's used in this building in Switzerland.
Oh, cool.
That's what I wanted to.
I didn't see that in the exhibit.
It's at the end. You skipped the last part of the room.
All right. Okay. All right. So anyway, I think that the idea was there was a time when we were trying to anticipate a more contemplative, more speculative, at least in a domestic realm.
Yeah.
I think that we have like I said, we had the opportunity.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity, I think, to be able to start to try to kind of influence with the opportunities we have to generate artifacts. I think that maybe one of the things that hold us back is that we try to do this too much from a conscious realm. I think that one of the things that maybe AI has a potential to do, if it's modulated properly by a kind of skillful designer, is to come up with kind of like provocative circumstances. And I think that is to kind of say there is the ability to search for configurations that have that provocative capacity. Where those things are, it's an interesting thing to do. But I believe that right now that drawing has that potential, model building has that potential, the two together have that potential. And I think including the idea of AI as drawing, because AI has the potential to be both drawing and model building, and could probably be separated in a way that it could do both at the same time separately. It could actually be used as both the model generator and the drawing generator, and be able to kind of be set up to manifest itself that way. Anyway, so I think that again, one of the things that I said before, which I find a little bit sad, is the fact that for the most part, architects have not been at the forefront of kind of generating these opportunities. They've simply reflected those things that society has given them to do. And that troubles me because I believe that architects are more uh, capable and more kind of like intelligent and probably should be given more of that activity,
Hmm.
because I believe that just the same way that at the end of the 19th into the 20th century, the individuals who had masterful technique had the ability to see those abstractions that were going to come to replace and generate the epoch and the period that was going to come. Whereas the institutions, like I said before, had lost the path, but were still holding tightly to the parameters that they had seen be useful and healthy in the past. So, as Whitehead says that sometimes those very same principles that allow you to kind of become vital and healthy, if not understood within the circumstance, can become inertial. And I believe that's where we are. And I think that we're looking to kind of attack those things that are kind of post-industrial revolution, say modern. But at the same time, I think at the same time, because of our envy, we're actually reinforcing them and making them more powerful rather than trying to kind of see their weaknesses. I think one of the things is also true is the fact that we probably didn't even fully utilize those things we understood in the 1920s when we kind of started to manifest these things that we talked about earlier. I think the kind of potential there, was not truly mined to its fullest. But again, at this point, that's no longer relevant since unless those things have the ability to kind of, as I said at the beginning, to take us and be able to manifest those desires, they wouldn't necessarily be interested.
Uh-huh.
Interested. Well, they wouldn't necessarily be something you'd want to kind of carry. It would just be ballast.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, so
Okay. Well, I'd like to bring up a point of scale. In
hmm,
Gothic architecture, there was an enormous translational shift that was adopted by humans in their activities of the day at an intimate scale, which had been drawn and then built on quite a grand scale.
hmm,
So, the grand scale being the churches, but the prevalence of Gothic architecture, its its engineering, the geometries, its shapes, its structural propositions was scaled down in a very intimate size to pulpits and baptismal fonts and scepters and censers and even the work of the goldsmiths. It was even used on tombstones.
hmm.
So these designs, these propositions, these these architectures, um, contrary to what most people think, was that the Gothic structures were so massive and they stood alone, separate from the population. Not at all true. Separate from the human activities of the day. Nothing could be further from the truth. These were adopted, and there are many examples of this in the excellent show at the Met, Gothic by Design, where you will see the entire structure of a church in the head of a scepter.
No,
I
there was,
mean, it
yeah,
was
it's
quite
interesting.
amazing. Yeah.
If you look closely, you can actually see things that develop a self similarity. I
Yeah,
mean, we
that's
would
what I'm
talk about
saying.
fractals and Mandelbrot sets and things like that, but in fact, if you look closely, you kind of see that. And in fact, some of the animations that again were done by kind of AI generated programs show you how in fact there was this kind of self similarity and there was this kind of like telescoping to kind of
Is
scales.
this your favorite
And
one?
yeah, and that's actually another thing we should kind of talk about there. There was an interesting thing because one of the things that was
Yeah.
interesting was because of the fact that, here there was a kind of a belief in pure geometry that kind of still had this kind of Aristotelian kind of purity, and the fact that there was, a certain magic to these kind of perfect forms, which, we realized later when we started to kind of understanding engineering at a deeper level and understanding like physics was not exactly the case, and that certain things were not basically perfect because they were perfect forms. They simply had the ability to kind of, without us knowing, be able to manifest themselves in ways that were physically kind of viable.
See if you want me to
No,
show
that's good.
more
That's good.
examples.
But I think like that's the kind of thing is that we came to understand in this point that we had this kind of sacred vision of geometry, which kind of comes to us from the previous times. But at the same time, what we're starting to see is the fact that we now no longer see the fact we can now see that that was naive, and that we can kind of go past that, because the geometry, if it doesn't have a structural capacity, which now we can know, right, it doesn't really it's not magic. And I think there was, it was later when in the Renaissance and afterwards where we started to kind of understand some of the mathematics that allowed us in the 17th and the 18th century to be able to kind of overcome and be able to get to the point where we could go past some of the things that had kind of happened. I think, I don't know if this is true, but I believe in my kind of never paid attention in architectural history class. I kind of like I don't pay much attention to architectural history now, but
you were
I know
busy
what I like.
in Sherwood Forest,
I was, right? But the thing was, I remember, I think the Pantheon was the largest spanning dome in the world until, I believe, somewhere near the end of the 19th century. So it took us that much time to be able to develop the mathematics and the engineering to understand that the geometry was capable of being taken further once we understood its physics. Anyway, so that's pretty much where we are. This was a good episode, even though both of us are kind of like pretty addled in the brain because of the allergies. So I hope this wasn't as kind of brutal as it kind of sounded, because I know sometimes I'm thinking to myself, wow, this sucks.
I do have one key point.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, say.
Coevolution, and this has everything to do with, one would think that humans would have been and would be co-evolving with their architecture, but they're not. And one example in nature, and I'll see the rest too, Bruce, is the recent discovery of coevolution in an octopus arm. It's a special structure, a special architecture, which co-evolved equal use for mating as well as stalking prey. Same architecture, same implement, same tool. I'll just say that.
Okay. So next week we'll be talking about the times of novel utility, which is basically an extension of what we're talking about here. So we'll say a lot of the kind of things. I don't know if I'll ever find my book of Emerson's on nature, that essay.
That's weird.
It was sad because I really wanted to kind of start with that, because I think there was a really good, the beginning of that essay.
It's around.
It's around. Anyway, but the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to benefit all for us to keep it just that way.
Coevolution.